Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels following week 5, the merge week. And I found this to be a pretty interesting week with some pretty exciting gameplay and admittedly some outcomes that I wasn't expecting, though we'll get to that more in a moment. But there are 14 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 14, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Scott, who does end up quitting the game here, which is pretty unfortunate considering that he was actually playing a pretty solid game for the most part. And it kind of comes out of left field as well, where Scott did seem to be one of the bigger players on the board, only for us to see in this episode that it was just taking a toll on him and that he had pretty much given up on the game to where he does pull himself here, which obviously explains his quiet edit for a lot of the season, as obviously a lot of quitters tend to get pretty quiet edits. Though obviously we do see him in this episode getting a visibility spike with him talking about how he hopes that others will play with empathy, only for him to get pretty upset when the vote was turning into Kitty to where he leaks the plan to her, which again is not great gameplay, though considering where he was at that point, it kind of makes sense why he does it. And I was thinking maybe there's a shot the vote could have turned on him, though we never quite got to that point. So again, him quitting does make sense for how it gets taken out in this spot, though obviously he is now out of the game, so he is here number 14. Now moving on to number 13, we have the second boot on the board, and here we have Winna, who is the proper merge boot of the season, and he pretty much gets no content this week where he's pretty invisible through and through, even though he does win immunity in the merge episode, which is pretty interesting. And we get to his boot episode where it really isn't until late on in the episode that we see the target shift to him, where obviously Ferris wants to take him out for reasons that aren't well explained within the episode, where in the episode he does explain how he wants to do this to weaken Mark, even though there are other considerations as well, such as the fact that Winna was part of the Titans group that was voting with Kirby during the post swap, and obviously Ferris had set up earlier in the season to him want to get revenge on those Titans for siding with the wrong group, although none of that gets brought up in that episode or even the episode afterwards, which is actually a big reason why I didn't think Winna was going home in that episode, and then also just how late in the episode it was. But obviously it does end up going through. Winna is taken out. And obviously as a merge boot, I feel like Winna played a mostly fine game where even though he was within the majority for a lot of it, I wouldn't say he was ever like in the power position in the same way that people like Charles or Valaria were. And you also the fact that he wasn't supposed to be the merge boot considering that he had won the first immunity challenge after the merge. So I feel like that's something to consider. But again, I feel like he played a mostly fine game, though he was never someone that I never saw as a true winner contender. But obviously he is now out of the game, so he is here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, we have the final boot from this week, and here we have Eden. And Eden's edit this week was really weird, where obviously he got a pretty big visibility spike throughout the entire week, where during the merge episode and even in the second episode, he got a lot of content talking about setting up the merge, talking about how this was a big moment and a big turning point. And I actually found this to be pretty good content for him for the most part. I feel like a winner would normally have a chance to lay out the dynamics after the merge and to really set things up for the rest of the game. But at the same time, he obviously got a lot of strange content before then, like the fact that he was so invisible during so much of the post-swap, with the exception of the actual swap itself. So I did find that kind of weird. And then we get to his actual boot episode, where I did feel like by the end of it, it was pretty clear he was being set up for a fall, where obviously he got tons of content about him wanting the Titans to sit together, and obviously with him like wanting to coach Jaden in order to be a big player, only for Jaden to later be the one to flip on him. And while I wouldn't fault Eden for that flip, it very much felt like that was the way that the episode was going. But if we are talking about Eden's game, I do find it to be a mostly impressive one actually, where he was actually very well positioned for a lot of the pre-merge, where he was very much driving things on the original Titans group. He's able to remain in a good position during the post-swap as well, where he's never in too much danger there. And then after the merge, I actually think he does play pretty well there as well, where obviously he is a big factor in pulling in the Titans together. And it is somewhat impressive that he was able to get Caroline and Kitty to want to work with that group despite their misgivings with the Mark and Valaria side. And I do think it was the right move for him to want to get the Titans to stick together, as obviously he is in a very strong position if he was able to do that. And while I don't think his target of Raymond wasn't necessarily ideal to where he probably should have gone for someone like an Alex, for instance, I don't actually fault him for his tactics during this round. And obviously, while Jaden flips and sends him out, I don't fault him too much for that either. So in a lot of ways, I do find Eden's gain here to be pretty impressive, but obviously he is now out of the game, which is why he's here at number 12. And with that, there are 11 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based off their edit and current game position. But number 11, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is still Kitty. And Kitty very much survives this week by the skin of her teeth, where she was obviously going to be the vote at the merge until Scott quit the game. Next episode, she obviously was going to be the target initially until it was so obvious that she was a target that they ended up switching over to Caroline. And while they make the deal with Ferris that allows them to stay safe during that round, we didn't see them and Caroline immediately turn back on that alliance, which was actually pretty bad for their game. And we got so much setup to Ferris being upset by this and him declaring war on the Caroline and Kitty side, to where, again, it's pretty obvious that Caroline and Kitty are being set up for a downfall here. And while it's surprising that it didn't happen this week, which was something I was expecting coming into it, I do feel like their time is running out. And I feel like with Kitty getting relatively little screen time herself, where she only came up due to the fact that she was so relevant to the actual game events, I feel like it's just so unlikely that her side is going to win by the end of it. So because of that, I have her here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we are actually sticking with the same list that we had from last week, and here we have Jaden, who obviously gets a pretty big visibility spike in this latest episode, where he obviously gets a lot of propping up for him wanting revenge against Winna. We obviously have him talking with Eden, basically Eden admitting that he's not been playing the game for much of the season, only for Eden to coach him up. We have him like hyping himself up before winning the immunity challenge, and then we get to his big decision at the end where he does flip his vote on the revote to take out Eden, which I do feel like is a pretty terrible move on the face of it, where even though Jaden's been at the bottom of the Titans power structure for a lot of it, it made no sense for him to flip at this point, as obviously he was safe from rocks, so that wasn't much of a concern. I feel like he doesn't have much connections with the Rebels group at this point. Really, his best option at that point was to latch on to Eden and pretty much just try to make Eden his number one, which, considering that it almost went to rocks to where it's possible Titan could have gone out, I feel like that would have left Eden with fewer options moving forward, to where it would have forced him to work more with Jaden, and obviously it would have kept Raymond safe, someone who Jaden could have taken to the end and have better shot at beating. And I feel like by Jaden flipping here, he just comes off as pretty untrustworthy and unreliable to a lot of the Titans, as I feel like they're probably not going to respect this move very much. And at the same time, I don't really feel like it built in much favor with the Rebels either. And at this point, I just don't really see much of an end game for Jaden, where I don't really see anyone wanting to take Jaden to the end unless they're dragging him to the end as a GOAT. And even then, I feel like there's not really much setup to that. I feel like Jaden's best bet is to try to just win every challenge at this point, which seems pretty unlikely. And I feel like with how negative his edit has been up to this point, where outside this episode he gets no content, I feel like I can't really have Jaden any higher than number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and this person actually went down from last week, and here we have Rianna. And again, I feel like Rihanna's probably not winning at this point, where her only confessional this week comes during episode 14 after she wins immunity. And really beyond that, she is mentioned in a couple of game talks along with Kirby, but even then, like, she's not that much involved in the actual decision making, where during the winter round, she thinks that Mark is a target, and she's really one of the only people there to not be pulled into either side, which, considering it was a close vote, is kind of insane when you think about it. And then during the most recent round, she was tricked by the other side into flushing her idol, and obviously Kirby goes along with it, and obviously that's not particularly great. So again, I feel like from a game standpoint, Rihanna's just kind of there, where even though she kind of has Kirby, it's not really enough to where Kirby could even pull her into their plan to vote out Caroline. And even beyond that, again, she's just kind of dangling in the game. And I feel like with her getting a pretty quiet edit outside of that, I can't really have her any higher than number 9. Now moving on to number 8, we have the person who I had below Rihanna last week, but now they're above them. And here we have Eileen. And again, I don't think Eileen played that poorly this week, where obviously she is working with the Ferris side, but really she was pretty much invisible this week, 0 confessionals to speak of. And while she is working alongside Ferris as they take out Winna and Eden, the fact that she herself is not really getting any content makes me feel like she's probably not winning at this point, so she is here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have someone who was also invisible this week, despite them being in a lot of danger, and here we have Raymond. And again, Raymond got 0 confessionals this week, which is insane considering he was almost evicted here, where obviously it was a tied vote, and it pretty much came down to Jaden flipping his vote in the middle of tribal to where Raymond would have gone home otherwise. And when you consider the fact that he almost went home, but also the fact that his side is very much in the power position right now, really speaks to his lack of win equity for me. Though at the same time, I am coming around to see him more as a losing finalist. I feel like that is a very likely probability at this point, which is a big reason why I do have him this high on the list. But again, he is not winning, which is why he's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we obviously have a pretty major character to get into here, and here we have Caroline. And again, the fact that Caroline and Kitty are both still in the game is pretty crazy when you think about it. And also the fact that Mark is still in the game, again, just really shows how differently this week went in my head. But obviously, I still don't think she's winning. I feel like she's still being set up for a downfall here, where even though Mark and Valaria got plenty of negativity, and from a pure gain standpoint, I feel like Caroline and Kitty got their way more with the actual votes, where obviously they were a key factor in saving themselves during the winner round by pulling in the Ferris group. It didn't feel like for a lot of the episode that would have been the case. And obviously they get lucky with the Scott quit where Kitty would have gone home regardless. And you also have the Eden round where the fact that they back out of their deal that they made with the Ferris group so early is really bad in my eyes, where they really had no reason to turn on the Ferris group that early by taking out Raymond. I feel like Caroline could have tried to keep that around a little bit longer, maybe try to push more for Mark and Valaria, considering that neither of them had immunity, or at the very least push for a different rebel target, maybe like an Alex or a Kirby, for instance. I feel like the fact that she just went along with wanting to take out Raymond in the spot is pretty bad, as obviously now we get this content of Ferris gunning for Caroline and declaring war against her, which again is another mark against her. I feel like at this point Caroline's probably not winning, which is why she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and this person didn't really go up so much as the other people moved down, but at number 5 I do have Alex. And again, Alex got pretty much nothing this week outside of him revealing his idol to everyone in the merch episode. And even beyond that, kind of similar to Rianna, he's kind of just dangling in the game where no one really wants to work with him, no one really wants to pull him into any plans. And obviously he was considered a decoy target at certain points, but obviously he scrapes through that. Again, I feel like Alex is probably not winning this game. Obviously, from a pure gain standpoint, it's looking pretty bad. But I do feel like compared to Rianna, I feel like he has more of an underdog story compared to Rianna. I feel like he's gotten more of a presence on the show, at least during the pre-merge, to where I could see him making a deeper run. But realistically, I feel like this was a pretty bad week for him. Don't really see him winning, so he's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and it's pretty much the same top 4 as last week, though excluding Eden, of course. Though I did actually switch the order here, but at number 4 we do have Kirby. And again, Kirby had a kind of subdued week, relatively speaking. Now she still got plenty of content, like with her like giving her thoughts on things, like her feeling like she's not calling the shots around camp. You obviously have her narrating stuff like Kitty, like going around campaigning super hard. You obviously have her like talking to Rianna about game situations. You even have her telling Rianna to play her idol in a spot where it's obviously being flushed. So again, I feel like Kirby's probably not winning the game at this point, and I feel like from a gain standpoint, this probably wasn't the best week for her. But again, she is one of the major characters on the season, so I will give her that, and she still got at least some content this week, so I have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, this person actually moved up compared to last week, and here we have Mark. Now, from a gain standpoint, this obviously wasn't the best week for Mark, where obviously he does try to flip against Caroline and Kitty initially and fails to get out both of them. Where obviously during the merch episode, he was about to get Kitty out until Scott quit, and then in the following episode, he tries and fails to flip on Caroline. And obviously we see Caroline being very upset at him, and obviously talks about wanting to get revenge against him, though he does able to smooth it over to a degree. Now, I'm not entirely sure how positive this content is presented on Mark's end, where obviously, first up, he wins the reward in episode 15, and obviously he does try to mend things by picking Caroline and Kitty for the reward, only for Eden to dunk on him, saying that that was a mistake and that he'll just make things worse. But then by the end of it, we see them kind of working together, though at the same time, it's more so due to Eden being able to pull them in, convincing them that the Titans need to remain strong. So again, I'm not entirely sure how we're supposed to come out this week, viewing Mark specifically, Though I think it's pretty evident at this point that Mark is winning this battle against Caroline and Kitty, where I feel like those two have bigger setups for downfalls compared to them. And obviously, he still has Valaria as someone that he can work with down the line. So obviously, this was a very weird week for Mark. Though, despite that, I do feel a bit more confident about his chances coming into it, though not to the same degree as the top two, which is why he is here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, we have the same person I had at number 2 last week, and here we have Ferris. And I actually wasn't expecting to have Ferris as high, as obviously this week wasn't ideal for him, where obviously he is completely invisible in the merged episode, which I do think is a pretty big knock when you think about it, though he does rebound in episode 14, where at that point he's more relevant to the actual story, where obviously he is very much involved in accepting this deal from Caroline and Kitty to save them during that tribal, which ends up going through, though obviously he is the one to throw out Winna's name and Winna is the one to go home. And then we see in this latest episode that we get him continuing to be more the main character that we saw from him earlier in the season, where obviously he talks about like wanting to work with Caroline and Kitty only for them to back out their plan to try to remain tight and strong. And he talks about how like if the plan doesn't go like how he was told it was, that it's a declaration of war. And obviously we see that play out where Caroline and Kitty do vote with the Titans against Raymond, who is one of his closest allies. And while they do like win out on that vote, it has almost nothing to do with what Ferris is doing, which again is kind of a knock from a gain standpoint. But I feel like from an Ed standpoint, I feel like we are starting to see Ferris emerge again as a key player. So I feel like despite his invisible merge episode, I feel like by the end of it, there was enough there to have Ferris still this high on the list. Though obviously by the end of it, I still don't think he's going to win by the end. So I do have him here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels is still Valaria. Now, again, I'm sure some people will expect her to be lower this week, especially after what happened across the episodes, where again, from a pure gain standpoint, this was not a very good week for Valaria, obviously, where she ends up losing Winna and Eden, neither of which are particularly good for her game. And even beyond that, you have her upsetting Caroline based off our comments from the Winna Tribal, where she calls her the weakest player on the tribe. And even her response in the following episode at the reward challenge isn't great either, where she ends up calling Caroline an emotional player. So again, from a pure in-game standpoint, this was actually not that great of a week for Valaria. But I still feel like the show is not really presenting it as that negative, where we're still getting the time of day to see Valeria's perspective, where obviously she does like lay out her perspective on things coming to the merge, setting up her revenge story with Caroline and Kitty. Even beyond that, you have her like winning immunity and safety without power during that initial merge round. You also have her like, again, at least having the chance to properly apologize to Caroline, where even though she makes some pretty questionable comments, she does eventually come around to where Caroline does kind of forgive her. So again, that's at least something. So again, I don't feel like it's as negative as what it could have been, which actually makes me feel higher about Valaria if I'm being honest. So again, I still feel pretty high on Valaria despite the fact that this week wasn't that great for her. I feel like she'll probably rebound, especially once the Caroline Kitty stuff comes around again. And because of that, I do have her here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I am still covering The Traders US Season 2, and I'm obviously starting coverage of Survivor 46, so you can look forward to that, along with other shows such as BB Can 12 and The Amazing Race 36. I'm on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.